Think you know the song "Stan" by Eminem. The full story behind it is darker than you imagine. Tonight's sleep story invites you into a chilling horror where fandom spirals into dark obsession. Will you join me as we navigate the haunting verses of this tale? The dim light of a single bulb cast long, wavering shadows across the room. The walls, once a plain shade of beige, were now almost entirely obscured by a patchwork of posters and magazine cutouts. Each image was of the same man, captured in various poses and expressions, Eminem. His lyrics, scrawled in Stan's messy handwriting, filled the gaps between the posters, creating a chaotic tapestry of admiration. Stan sat hunched over a worn-out desk, the wood scarred with years of use. A blank piece of paper lay before him, its edges slightly curled. Beside it, an old cassette player hummed softly, playing Eminem's tracks on a loop. The lyrics, so familiar to Stan, seemed to echo his own thoughts, his own life. They were a balm to his troubled soul, a voice in the darkness that understood him. Taking a deep breath, Stan picked up his pen. The weight of it felt reassuring in his hand, like an old friend. He began to write, his words flowing effortlessly onto the page. "Dear Slim," he began, his handwriting neat and deliberate. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I had to write to you. Your music, man, it's been a lifeline for me. It's like you've lived my life, felt my pain. I can't explain it, but I feel this connection, you know?" As he wrote, the room around him seemed to fade away. The weight of his past, the struggles he'd faced, they all poured out onto the paper. This was his chance, his one shot to reach out to the one person he believed could truly understand him. After what felt like hours, Stan paused, reading over his words. The raw emotion in them was palpable, a testament to his sincerity. He felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. What if Eminem actually read it? What if he replied? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Carefully, he folded the letter, placing it in an envelope. On the front, he wrote Eminem's name, followed by the address of his record label. It was a long shot, he knew, but he had to try. With a final glance around his shrine-like room, Stan whispered a silent prayer, hoping against hope that his words would find their way to the man who had unknowingly saved him time and time again. The days following the dispatch of his first letter were filled with an electric anticipation. Each morning, Stan would rush to the mailbox, his heart pounding in his chest, hoping to find a response. But as days turned into weeks, the empty mailbox began to gnaw at his hope, replacing it with a growing sense of despair. Undeterred, Stan began penning more letters. Each one was a deeper dive into his psyche, a raw and unfiltered look into the life of a man teetering on the edge. The letters spoke of his troubled childhood, the bullies that tormented him, the cold, indifferent world that seemed to have turned its back on him. But through it all, there was Eminem's music, a beacon of hope in his darkest hours. "Dear Slim," one letter began, "do you remember that track where you talked about being bullied? Man, that was my life. Every word, every line, it was like you were speaking just to me. How did you get through it? How did you turn all that pain into something so powerful?" Another letter delved into his struggles with addiction, the countless nights he'd spent in a drug-induced haze, trying to escape the demons of his past. "Your songs, Slim, they pulled me out of that abyss. When I felt like giving up, like ending it all, your words gave me strength. How do you do it? How do you keep going when the world's against you?" But as the letters piled up, a recurring theme began to emerge, a desperate plea for acknowledgement. Each letter ended with a variation of the same sentiment. "Please, Slim, just let me know you've read this. Just one word, one sign that you've heard me." The act of writing became an obsession for Stan. The world outside his apartment ceased to exist. His reality was the paper, the pen, and the hope that one day Eminem would reply. The walls of his room, already plastered with posters, became covered in drafts of letters, a testament to his growing desperation. And as the letters accumulated, so did the weight of their unanswered pleas. Each silent day added another brick to the wall of isolation that Stan felt closing in on him. The very act of writing, once a cathartic release, now became a haunting reminder of his solitude. Yet, hope, as they say, dies last. And so, with trembling hands and a heavy heart, Stan would seal each letter, sending it out into the void, praying that this time, just maybe, he'd get a response. In the small kitchen of their shared apartment, Dido would often find Stan, hunched over the table, pen in hand, lost in his letters. At first, she found his dedication endearing. The way his eyes lit up when he spoke about Eminem, the hope that shimmered in them every time he sealed an envelope, it was a side of Stan she hadn't seen in a long time. "Another one for Slim?" she'd ask, her voice light and teasing as she tied her blonde hair into a loose ponytail. Stan would look up, a sheepish grin on his face. "Yeah, I feel like he's the only one who gets me, you know?" Dido would nod, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "I get you too, you know," she'd whisper, planting a soft kiss on his cheek. And so, in those early days, Dido became Stan's pillar of support. She'd accompany him to the post office, holding his hand as they dropped the letters into the mailbox. They'd stand there for a moment, watching as the letters disappeared into the dark abyss, sharing a silent prayer. On weekends, they'd sit together, listening to Eminem's tracks. Stan would rap along, his voice filled with passion, while Dido swayed to the rhythm, her eyes closed, lost in the music. It was their little ritual, a bond they shared. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, Stan would read his letters out loud to Dido. She'd listen intently, her fingers tracing patterns on his arm, offering words of encouragement when he doubted himself. "He's going to read them, Stan," she'd say with unwavering conviction. "And he's going to see just how special you are." For Dido, it wasn't about the letters or the hope of a reply. It was about seeing Stan happy, about giving him something to believe in. And if that meant mailing letters every week or dancing to Eminem songs in their living room, she was all in. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, with no reply in sight, the weight of the silence began to take its toll. The shared moments of hope began to be overshadowed by a growing unease, a sense that something was amiss. Yet for now, Dido held on to the belief that things would change, that one day they'd open their mailbox to find a letter addressed to Stan, and all would be right in their world. The passage of time, often a healer, became a cruel tormentor for Stan. Each sunrise that greeted him without a letter in response was a stark reminder of his insignificance. The walls of the apartment, once a sanctuary adorned with Eminem's visage, began to feel like they were closing in on him, each poster a mocking face, each lyric a taunting whisper. Stan's letters, once filled with admiration and hope, began to take on a darker tone. The neat handwriting that once flowed across the pages became jagged, the ink sometimes smudged by hurried strokes or teardrops. "Dear Slim," a letter began, "it's been 6 months. 6 months of silence. Do you even care? Do you even know what it feels like to pour your soul onto a page only to be met with nothingness?" The frequency of the letters increased, sometimes 2 or 3 in a single day, each one more frantic, more desperate than the last. "Why won't you answer?" another letter screamed, the words almost carved into the paper. "Is this some kind of game to you?" The apartment became a maze of paper. Drafts of letters littered the floor, crumpled balls of frustration piled in corners. The once cherished cassette player, which had played Eminem's songs on a loop, now lay discarded, its tapes strewn about, a testament to Stan's growing disillusionment. Nights were the hardest. Stan would sit in the dim light, the shadows playing tricks on his mind. The silence of the room was broken only by the scratching of his pen and the occasional sob that escaped his lips. The weight of the unanswered letters bore down on him, each one a heavy chain, pulling him deeper into the abyss of his own mind. The world outside ceased to exist for Stan. Days blended into nights, meals were forgotten, and the once regular trips to the mailbox became a dreaded chore. Each empty-handed return was a fresh wound, a stark reminder of his isolation. And as the letters piled up, so did the layers of Stan's unraveling psyche. The hope that had once fueled his words was now replaced by a growing resentment, a burning anger that threatened to consume him. Dido, once the beacon of support in Stan's life, found herself increasingly sidelined by his growing obsession. The man she loved, the one who'd dance with her in the living room and share whispered dreams in the dead of night, was slipping away, replaced by a shadow consumed by desperation. Each morning she'd watch from the kitchen as Stan would rush to the mailbox, his face a canvas of hope. But the return, the slump in his shoulders, the defeated drag of his feet, told her all she needed to know. Another day without a reply. She tried to reach out, to bridge the growing chasm between them. "Stan," she'd say, her voice soft, "let's go for a walk, get some fresh air." But her suggestions were met with vacant stares or irritable dismissals. The apartment, once their shared sanctuary, began to feel oppressive. The walls, covered in Eminem's face, seemed to watch her, their silent judgment palpable. The discarded letters, the scribbled lyrics, they all screamed of Stan's dissent, pulling him further away from her with each passing day. One evening, as Stan sat hunched over yet another letter, Dido mustered the courage to broach a subject she'd been contemplating for weeks. "Stan," she began hesitantly, "have you thought about seeing someone? A therapist, maybe? Just to talk?" Stan's reaction was immediate and fierce. His eyes, once filled with love, now blazed with anger. "You think I'm crazy?" he snapped, his voice dripping with venom. "You think I need help?" Dido recoiled, tears stinging her eyes. "No, Stan," she whispered, her voice trembling. I miss you. I miss us." But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Stan returned to his letter, his pen scratching furiously on the paper, leaving Dido alone in her growing sea of worry. As days turned into weeks, Dido's concern morphed into a gnawing fear. The man she loved was spiraling, and she felt powerless to stop it. She found herself watching him, studying his every move, looking for signs, any sign, that the old Stan was still there, somewhere beneath the layers of obsession. But with each passing day, that hope dimmed, replaced by the chilling realization that she was losing him, perhaps forever. The blinding lights of the stage, the deafening roar of the crowd, the intoxicating rush of adrenaline. This was Eminem's world now. From the grimy streets of Detroit to the glittering arenas of the world, his rise to fame was nothing short of meteoric. Each lyric he spat, each rhyme he crafted, resonated with millions, turning him into an icon, a voice for the voiceless. After each show, as the last echoes of applause faded, Eminem would retreat to his dressing room, the weight of his newfound fame pressing down on him. The room, filled with bouquets, gifts, and letters from fans, was a stark contrast to the empty apartments and lonely nights of his past. Interviews became a daily ritual. Journalists, their faces a blur of rehearsed smiles and feigned interest, would hang on to his every word, dissecting his lyrics, probing into his troubled past. "How does it feel?" they'd ask, their voices dripping with faux concern, "to be the voice of a generation?" Eminem would answer, his voice steady, his gaze distant. "It's a responsibility," he'd say, "one I don't take lightly." But beneath the rehearsed answers and polished demeanor, a storm was brewing. The fan mail, once a trickle, had turned into a deluge. Piles upon piles of letters, each one a cry for help, a plea for acknowledgement, a testament to the impact he'd had on countless lives. They came from all over the world, from teenagers, parents, even grandparents, all drawn to the raw honesty of his lyrics. Late at night, in the solitude of his hotel room, Eminem would try to read some of them. The stories they told, of pain, of struggle, of redemption, were overwhelming. Each letter was a mirror, reflecting parts of his own tumultuous journey. But the sheer volume was suffocating. It was impossible to read them all, to shoulder the weight of so many expectations. And so, as the tours continued and the interviews piled up, the letters, unread and unnoticed, began to gather dust, lost in the chaos of Eminem's meteoric rise. In a dimly lit storage room, stacks upon stacks of letters formed a labyrinth of paper and ink. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and the silent cries of countless souls seeking solace, understanding, or just a moment of Eminem's time. Among these, buried deep within the heart of this paper maze, were Stan's letters. Each envelope, meticulously addressed, bore the weight of Stan's hopes and dreams. The ink, at times smudged by hurried strokes or teardrops, told tales of a life lived in the shadows, of a soul reaching out for a lifeline. But here, in this forgotten room, their voices were muted, their pleas unheard. An old janitor, the lines on his face telling tales of years gone by, was the sole guardian of this sanctuary of stories. Every week, he'd shuffle in, his steps slow but steady, and add to the ever-growing piles. He'd often pause, his gaze lingering on a random envelope, wondering about the life and story it held. But with a sigh, he'd move on, the sheer magnitude of his task weighing him down. One evening, as the last rays of the sun cast a golden hue over the room, the janitor stumbled upon one of Stan's letters. The envelope, slightly crumpled, seemed to pulsate with a desperate energy. Drawn to it, the janitor picked it up, his fingers tracing the familiar "Slim" written on the front. For a moment he considered opening it, letting Stan's words wash over him, but a glance at the mountains of unread letters around him made him hesitate. With a heavy heart, he placed the letter back into the pile, a single tear escaping his eye. And so, as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Stan's letters, filled with raw emotion and desperate pleas, remained buried, their cries for acknowledgement lost in the cacophony of voices, all vying for a moment in the limelight. The apartment, once filled with the soft hum of Eminem's tracks and the gentle rustling of paper, began to resonate with a different kind of sound, the clinking of glass bottles and the muffled sobs of a broken man. Stan, once meticulous in his letter writing, now found solace at the bottom of a bottle. The amber liquid became both his refuge and his tormentor, blurring the lines between reality and the haunting abyss of his mind. Dido, her heart heavy with worry, watched as the man she loved transformed before her eyes. The hopeful glint that once shone in Stan's eyes was replaced by a vacant stare, one that seemed to look right through her. His once gentle touch now bore the weight of frustration and anger. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows across their living room, Dido approached Stan, her voice trembling. "Stan," she whispered, "maybe it's time to let go. Maybe he's just too busy, or maybe the letters got lost. But this isn't you." Stan's reaction was swift and fierce. The bottle in his hand crashed against the wall, its contents spilling like the pent-up emotions he'd been holding back. "You don't get it, Dido," he roared, his voice echoing with a raw pain. "He was my last hope, my only connection to a world that understood me." Dido, tears streaming down her face, tried to reach out to him, her fingers trembling. "Stan, please," she pleaded. "We can get through this together. You don't need a letter to validate your worth." But her words, meant to comfort, only seemed to fuel Stan's rage. He lunged at her, his fingers closing around her wrist with a vice-like grip. "You wouldn't understand," he hissed, his breath reeking of alcohol. "You've never been ignored, never been invisible." The tension in the room was palpable, a storm brewing on the horizon. Dido, her heart pounding in her chest, tried to pull away, her eyes searching for the Stan she once knew. But all she saw was a stranger, consumed by obsession and despair. And as the night wore on, the apartment, once a haven of love and shared dreams, became a prison, its walls bearing witness to the slow unraveling of a soul. The basement, a place once used for storage and the occasional laundry day, had taken on a sinister aura. The single bulb that hung from the ceiling cast a feeble light, its flickering creating dancing shadows that seemed to mock the dire situation below. Stan's face, contorted by rage and alcohol-fueled madness, was barely recognizable. His hands moved with a frantic energy, tying Dido's wrists with coarse rope, ensuring she couldn't escape. The cold concrete floor beneath her sent shivers up her spine, but it was the look in Stan's eyes that truly terrified her. It was the look of a man unhinged, teetering on the edge of sanity. With Dido secured, Stan moved to an old stereo system that sat in the corner, its speakers covered in a layer of dust. He inserted a cassette, and soon the hauntingly familiar beats of Eminem's songs filled the room. But this time, they weren't a source of comfort or connection. They were a chilling soundtrack to a nightmare. The lyrics, once a balm to Stan's troubled soul, now took on a twisted meaning. Each word, each rhyme, seemed to amplify his anger, driving him further into his delusion. He paced the room, his steps erratic, his voice joining the chorus, screaming the lyrics at the top of his lungs. Dido, her vision blurred by tears, tried to make sense of the situation. The pain from the ropes biting into her skin was nothing compared to the anguish of seeing Stan, the man she loved, in this state. The music, playing on a relentless loop, became a torturous reminder of the man Stan once was and the abyss he had fallen into. As the hours dragged on, the basement became a chamber of horrors. The combination of Eminem's powerful lyrics and Stan's erratic behavior created a suffocating atmosphere, one where hope seemed a distant memory. And through it all, Dido lay there, bound and helpless, praying for a miracle, praying for a way out of this hellish nightmare. Amidst the cacophony of Eminem's tracks, Dido's voice emerged, soft and trembling, but laced with a determination that cut through the oppressive atmosphere of the basement. "Stan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you remember the first time we danced to this song? In our living room with the lights dimmed, just the two of us?" Stan paused, the lyrics he'd been screaming dying on his lips. He turned to look at her, his eyes bloodshot, but for a brief moment a flicker of recognition passed through them. Dido continued, her voice gaining strength. "We had dreams, Stan. Dreams of a future, of a family. Do you remember the day we found out about our baby? The joy, the hope? That's still in us, Stan. It's still there." Stan's face contorted, a battle of emotions playing out. The weight of Dido's words, the memories they evoked, seemed to pierce through the fog of his rage. He sank to his knees, his head in his hands, the music now a distant echo. Dido, seizing the moment, pressed on. "We can get through this, Stan, together, just like we always have. But you have to let me in. You have to let us help you." The basement, once filled with anger and despair, was now thick with tension. The air was charged, the outcome hanging in the balance. Stan's breathing, ragged and heavy, was the only sound, each exhale a testament to his inner turmoil. Minutes felt like hours as Dido waited, her heart in her throat for Stan's response. The ropes that bound her, the cold concrete beneath her, all faded into the background as she focused on the man before her, willing him to see reason, to remember the love they shared. And as the music continued its relentless loop, the fate of their future, of their unborn child, hung precariously in the balance. The dim light of the basement cast eerie shadows on the walls as Stan, his face a mask of determination, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and a pen. The music, once a source of solace, now played in the background, its beats punctuating the heavy silence. With trembling hands, Stan began to write, each word a testament to his fractured state of mind. "Dear Slim, by the time you read this, it'll probably be too late. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe as a final plea, maybe just to let you know how much you meant to me. Every lyric, every beat, it spoke to me, gave me hope when there was none. But that hope's gone now, replaced by a void that's consuming me. I tried, Slim, I really did. I reached out again and again hoping for a sign, a word, anything, but all I got was silence. And that silence, it's deafening. I don't blame you. You're a star with millions of fans and I'm just one voice in the crowd. But that voice, Slim, it's screaming now and I can't drown it out. I've got Dido with me. She's scared and I hate myself for it. But I need her with me for this final journey. I want her to know that I love her, that none of this is her fault. It's just the darkness, Slim. It's taken over, and I can't fight it anymore. I'm taking a drive tonight, one last ride. I've got your songs on loop, letting them wash over me, letting them take me where I need to go. I don't know where that is, but I hope it's a place where the pain stops, where the voices quieten. I wish things were different, Slim. I wish I could have met you, shared my story, heard your voice. But wishes, they're just that, aren't they? Empty dreams that fade with the dawn. Goodbye, Slim, and thank you for everything. As Stan finished the letter, a single tear rolled down his cheek, landing on the paper, smudging the ink. He folded it carefully, placing it in an envelope, and with one last look around the basement, he made his way upstairs, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The night was alive with fury. Rain lashed down in torrents, each drop a stinging reminder of the tempest both outside and within Stan's mind. The old car's windshield wipers worked overtime, struggling to keep up with the deluge, their rhythmic motion a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm. Inside the car, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The cassette player, its speakers slightly distorted from age, played Eminem's tracks, each lyric echoing Stan's spiraling thoughts. Beside him on the passenger seat lay a small recorder, its red light blinking, capturing every word, every emotion. "I hope you hear this, Slim," Stan began, his voice shaky but resolute. "I wanted you to know, to really understand what led me here. It's not your fault, not really. It's just the silence. It became too much." The car's headlights barely pierced the darkness, the road ahead a blur of shadows and rain. But Stan drove on, the destination clear in his mind, even if the path was obscured. In the trunk, muffled sounds of Dido's pleas could be heard, her voice a haunting reminder of the reality of Stan's actions. But he seemed oblivious, lost in his own world, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within. "I've got Dido with me," he continued, his voice breaking. "I didn't want to be alone, not for this. I hope you understand. I hope someone does." The car sped on, its tires struggling for grip on the rain-slicked roads. The storm showed no signs of abating, its fury matching the crescendo of emotions building within Stan. "I just wanted to be heard, Slim," he whispered, tears mingling with the rain on his face. "I just wanted someone to listen." And as the car raced on, the storm outside and the one within Stan converged, leading him towards a destiny that seemed both inevitable and tragic. The studio was a sanctuary for Eminem, a place where he could escape the relentless pressures of fame and lose himself in his music. The dim lighting, the soft hum of equipment, and the familiar scent of old records provided a comforting cocoon from the outside world. Taking a rare break, Eminem leaned back in his chair, stretching his tired muscles. His gaze drifted to a corner of the room where stacks of fan mail lay, a testament to the impact he'd made on countless lives. Most of these letters would be read by his team, but today, something compelled him to sift through them himself. As he began to skim through the envelopes, one particular box caught his eye. It was older, its edges worn, and it bore the weight of time and neglect. Curiosity piqued, Eminem opened the box, revealing a series of letters, all meticulously addressed to him. The handwriting, though neat, carried an urgency that was palpable. Each envelope bore the same name, Stan. A chill ran down Eminem's spine. The sheer volume of letters from a single fan was unsettling. He pulled out the first letter, its paper slightly yellowed, and began to read. The words, filled with admiration and hope, seemed harmless enough. But there was something about the box, about the sheer number of letters from Stan, that gnawed at Eminem's gut. He placed the letter back into the box, his fingers lingering on the envelope. The weight of the unread stories, the untold emotions contained within, pressed down on him. He felt an inexplicable pull, a need to delve deeper into Stan's world, to understand the mind behind the relentless correspondence. But for now, he closed the box, placing it on his desk, a silent promise to himself that he would return to it, to Stan's story. The studio's comforting hum resumed, But the box, with its haunting contents, remained, casting a shadow over the room. The studio's ambient lighting cast a soft glow over the box, its contents now spread out on Eminem's desk. Each letter, neatly stacked in chronological order, was a chapter in a story that was yet to unfold. With a deep breath, Eminem picked up the first letter, bracing himself for the journey ahead. The initial letters were filled with admiration, a fan's heartfelt appreciation for the music that had touched his soul. Stan spoke of his struggles, of the solace he found in Eminem's lyrics, and of the hope that one day he'd receive a reply. The tone was earnest, the words sincere. But as Eminem progressed through the letters, a subtle shift began to emerge. The tone grew more desperate, the pleas for acknowledgement more pronounced. Stan spoke of his girlfriend, Dido, of their shared love for Eminem's music, and of the child they were expecting. But intertwined with these moments of joy were threads of darkness, hints of an obsession that was beginning to take hold. The letters grew more frequent, their content more erratic. Stan's words painted a picture of a man teetering on the edge, his grip on reality slipping with each unanswered letter. He wrote of sleepless nights, of walls plastered with Eminem's posters, and of conversations with Dido that grew more heated, more volatile. Eminem could feel the weight of each word, the raw emotion pouring off the pages. The room, once his sanctuary, now felt oppressive, the walls closing in as he delved deeper into Stan's descent. One letter, its edges stained with what looked like dried tears, spoke of a particularly heated argument with Dido. Stan's words were frantic, filled with regret and a palpable sense of despair. He wrote of turning to alcohol, of nights lost in a haze of anger and self-loathing. As the stack of letters dwindled, the transformation was complete. The hopeful fan, seeking a connection, had been replaced by a man consumed by obsession, his sanity hanging by a thread. Eminem, his hands shaking, set the last letter down. The weight of Stan's story, the tragic trajectory of a life unraveling, pressed down on him. He felt a mix of guilt, horror, and a growing sense of dread. The box, once an innocuous collection of fan mail, had revealed a chilling narrative, one that was far from over. Null. At the bottom of the box, nestled between the last few letters, was an old cassette tape. Its plastic casing was slightly cracked, and a hastily scribbled label read, "For Slim, the final message." Eminem hesitated, his fingers hovering over the tape. The weight of Stan's letters still fresh in his mind, he felt a deep sense of foreboding. But he needed to know, needed to hear Stan's voice, to understand the depths of his despair. Inserting the tape into an old player, he pressed play. The room was filled with the sound of static, then a deep breath, and finally, Stan's voice, shaky but clear. "Slim, I don't know if you'll ever hear this. Hell, I don't even know if I want you to. But I needed to say this, to get it out. The silence. It's too much. It's like a void, swallowing me whole." The sound of rain and the distant rumble of thunder could be heard in the background, painting a bleak picture of that fateful night. "I've got Dido with me," Stan continued, his voice breaking. "She's scared, Slim, and I hate myself for it. But I can't be alone, not now." There was a pause, the weight of Stan's emotions palpable even through the recording. "I just wanted to be heard, to feel seen. Your music, it was my lifeline. But now it feels like a noose." The sound of a car engine revving, the tires skidding on wet asphalt, punctuated his words. Dido's muffled cries could be heard, her pleas a haunting backdrop to Stan's final message. "I'm sorry, Slim," Stan whispered, his voice filled with regret. "I'm so sorry." The tape ended with the haunting sound of Eminem's own song playing in the background, its lyrics taking on a chilling new meaning. Eminem sat in stunned silence, the weight of the tape's contents pressing down on him. The room, once his sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, the walls echoing with Stan's final words. The tragic tale of a fan's descent into madness, of a love that turned to obsession, and of a desperate plea for acknowledgement had come to its chilling conclusion. And Eminem, the unwitting catalyst, was left to grapple with the haunting aftermath.
As our story comes to a close, let the lull of this soothing ambiance continue to cradle you further into your journey of calmness and rest. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your relaxation and sleep routine tonight. Remember, each day brings a new story, and each night brings a fresh chance to regenerate, to dream, and to become more of who you are. Good night, dear listener. Until our next story, sleep well and dream beautifully.